I'm excited about our conversation today. It's one that I think as leaders, in whatever role we have and wherever we sit in whatever organization, this is a conversation I think is going to be relevant for all. I'm excited to join HCI today and really appreciate Cornerstone sponsorship and all of you all from across the country joining in. This, I'm hoping, will be, for you, a valuable hour. I'd like for us to set the stage for this particular hour together and specifically for this conversation to make sure that I want you, when you leave this dialogue, you walk away with tools that you really feel you can implement. And so as we go through this, I will be introducing to you tools that we have used at the state of Tennessee, that I have used in the ministry prior to coming to the state, and what I've worked with public and private sector leaders using in their organizations to really make a difference in the change process. Today we're talking about the people of change. We're going to focus a lot on working with people in the change process, and also how do we actually develop change agents within our organization. Pretty excited to begin this idea of change is the new normal. I can't tell you how many times I have had employees come to me and say, Trish, when are you all going to stop changing things? Now that question is pretty humorous, especially if you have a continuous improvement mindset. And the answer is typically not what they're expecting to hear. The answer to that question is, we're not going to be changing. We're not going to be stopping change. We're actually going to be in this continual change modality as we move the organization from good to great. So how do we continue to improve? How do we get better? Well, change is how we do it. However, we want to make sure that change is necessary, change is needed. And so as we go through our conversation, I want to make sure that we realize different milestones through the change process that are essential for us as leaders to pay attention to. I recall this idea of being a change agent. I thought it was a brilliant idea, and I thought people would just run to sign up to be a change agent as we in the state were actually going through a massive culture change ourselves, moving from civil service to actually what we now have is a performance-based culture. And how did we do that? How did we change the government process, the government approach to doing business? How did we rewrite who we were as public servants? And that change process began in 2012, and we are in year 7 and about year 7, where we have been paying attention to now this massive culture change. And I'm going to describe a little bit about that as we go through and the tools that we used to talk about it. But being a change agent is not something that people I have seen run to. And I think that it does begin with this idea of we've got to have leadership who gets the fact that change starts at the top. I love these two quotes because it really does highlight what I'm trying to illustrate here, that so many times we try to change a culture or change an organization or even change a process, and we don't have top layer buy-in, and so that change usually is not sustainable. It usually doesn't make it to the end. And as we look at this, one of the things I've paid close attention to in my role as the state's chief learning officer is to make sure that I have executive sponsors for every new initiative, for every program, for any event that we are going to be trying to do. An executive sponsor does several things. It shows the actual workforce base that this is important because we have executive sponsorship. It sends a message that the executive thinks it's worth their time to be a part of it, and it actually demonstrates how whatever we're doing is attached to the executive's vision. when we talk about change, I really don't want to lose this idea that change has to start at the top. And so many people say, yeah, but all the innovation that comes from new employees or managers who are wanting to improve their divisions and their teams. And I'm not saying that that is not part of this process, but what we want to do is first invite executive sponsorship to say, hey, we are really trying to improve ourselves as a workforce. We're trying to improve our divisional processes or our team services to customers. And so how can you as an executive really support us in doing that? And when the workforce hears that executives are involved, it really reinforces the importance. And I never want to forget the fact that 70% of all change fails. So we've been talking about this conversation a long time. We've actually, many years now, been trying to figure out what is it in this change piece that's not working. How can we actually move from point A to point B if we're just changing a process, if we're changing an organization, if we're merging, if we're acquiring new divisions under one particular umbrella, or it's an event, or if it's a new initiative that is being driven, how can we actually hit that 30% mark of change success? Well, I think we have to pay attention to what doesn't work and why change fails in order to get our answers to how to hit our 30% mark inside that arena. And so if we look at all these different reasons to change, that change fails, you'll see there's a couple in here that are kind of my favorite. One, complacency. We have, it's like you've heard of the cliche swear jar, right? Well, when we talk about complacency, one of the things we have is a jar that every time you have to put something in it that says, oops, I said that's the way we've always done it. So it's this idea that we've got employees possibly in our workforce who doesn't want change because it makes things uncomfortable. It takes everybody out of their comfort zone. And I hear this sometimes too, Trish. Why are we messing up what's working? And I always respond with, well, we're not. So we're checking to see if it is working. And if it is working, then let's keep doing it this way. If it's not working, then let's figure out what is a better way to do it, a process improvement or a people improvement, so that we can become the most effective and efficient organization we need to be for our customers. Everything becomes very customer-centric, and complacency really doesn't fit in that world. And so how do we help our workforce understand that mediocrity, complacency, really doesn't work in a continuous improvement organization? Sometimes we call that culture fit. Sometimes we say, well, if you like where you are and what you're doing, and you don't really want to make it better or improve it, then maybe this isn't the right fit anymore. And we ask people to self-assess and to begin to say, do I want to be a part of this? Do I want to be held accountable at different levels? But complacency doesn't work. And we have to sometimes really say that out loud so that people are very clear that we're not accepting people just to stay where they are. And just because we've done it that way in the past doesn't mean we're going to do it that way in the future. And so really asking people to not say, well, that's not how we do it here, or we haven't done it that way, we've always done it this way. Really asking people to put on this innovative approach to how we could potentially do it or possibly do it. The other one I like on this list, not necessarily like, but think that it's important to note is this lack of training. And so sometimes we just have an action plan for change. We've got the plan together. We've got it all ready to go. And we have forgotten one important element, and that is to train folks on what's coming, what's about to be. Are they ready for the go live button? And making sure that we're not doing that in a reactive mode, but making sure that the training happens at the right phase of change. So many times it's like, oops, we forgot to equip this group with this so that they could be successful. And so change goes live, we push that button, and not everybody's ready to go. So it's really important to make sure you have your training plan along with your action plan in the change process. And I'm going to show you a couple of things on how we do that at the state when we're looking at it. It starts with this mentality of thinking systematically. Now, if we are thinking this way, it's really important to understand that I call it the art of hovering. And I don't know if you've ever been in a helicopter or not, but one of the most difficult maneuvers for a helicopter pilot is to actually hover. And that is, they stand still over a spot. I've actually experienced this personally, and it is fascinating. So you're in this helicopter. You can see the whole area of view of what's going on, and then the helicopter just stands still right there. And you can just see so far out, and you take all these different pictures and get a different perspective. So when we think systemically, what we're doing is, imagine yourself on the interstate at rush hour traffic, 5 p.m., anywhere you are in the country. And what you see before you is traffic. What you see beside you is traffic. And I know if you're in Nashville, Tennessee, we're talking about transit, and we're doing all kinds of conversations around how do we improve our transportation so that people can move better. Well, if you're on the ground at 5 o'clock on our interstates, you see in front of you, sideways, and behind you vehicles. So sometimes, though, that's not because that you can't actually travel on the interstates. It's that there is a blockage ahead, and you can't see that sitting on the ground. We like to use that analogy in that get in your organizational helicopter, hypothetically, and fly above your organization and begin to see what's clogging your system. Is there a particular place where your traffic movement is getting stopped or is getting interrupted? And in those disruptions, when you're in that helicopter or that organizational helicopter and you're hovering over your organization and you're looking big, you're seeing everything inside the organization, you can spot the trouble areas. You can begin to create alternative routes so that you can work around that until it can get fixed. Unless we hover as leaders, though, we cannot fully navigate the change process. And I teach executives to think about this hovering as this isn't something you do once a year at a strategic planning retreat. It's important to hover in an organization pretty frequently so that you can see if the flow of business is actually working. Ken Miller wrote The Extreme Government Makeover, and he talks about the kinks in the pipes within an organization. And where's the turns and twists? Where are the bottlenecks? And we can't see those unless, as leaders, we rise above it and we look at the organization as a whole. So in any change process, it's really critical to make sure that we hover first as we build our case for change and why we actually want to participate and implement this change. As you'll see, there are two types of change, and change is big. There's two types that we have to pay attention to. Not all change is transformational change. This is the big change, culture change, what the state of Tennessee went through when we did our civil service reform in 2012, where we actually changed the law. And we moved from a seniority-based culture where everything that we did in government prior to 2012 was based on how long you'd been in your seat. So you got promoted if you'd been there the longest. It wasn't about were you the most qualified. It was about how long you had been in that particular role, or not just that role, but inside state government as a whole. So we changed that. We passed the TEAM Act, which was the Tennessee Excellence, Accountability, and Management Act. And in that, we realized that we needed to move to a culture where we were rewarding performance. And we got rid of this idea of complacency, this idea that all that you needed to do was show up and we would reward you. We moved to a transformational change that was an entire cultural change where now it's performance-based. And as we did that, yes, we had, because it was so big, these are the 4 pieces that we knew was existing. Our structure was impacted, our mission, core values, everything that our 40,000 plus employees had known prior to 2012 was changing. So you can imagine how big that felt, how scary that felt, the anxiety, the resistance that, I'm not sure that this is even going to work. And so the standing back and saying, well, maybe or maybe not, I'll participate. But what people quickly realize is when you're doing transformational change and the entire organization's changing, then you have to get on board or you'll get left behind. The other part of change that's important to note is incremental change. And this is the type of change where people aren't, it doesn't freak people out so much because it's smaller. It's those baby steps, but it's every day trying to be better than we were the day before. I always say that to the workforce when I'm out speaking and participating in different leadership events. As I'm leading leaders, I want to make sure they understand that I try to show up a better version of myself than I was the day before. Well, that mindset says that you're always going to be participating in incremental change. So that's improvement on the fly, right? So something happens. So let's say we lead a conference. Well, right after that conference, we're going to come together and say, and do what I call the after action report. What worked? What didn't work, and what do we want to do to improve it for the future? And those 3 questions, what worked, what didn't work, and what can we do to make it better for the future, I think those are really differentiators. Because when a group actually is intentional about always reflecting on what was, what can be, opens up all kinds of new doors and has so much possibility. The incremental change isn't as scary. You don't get as much anxiety within the workplace. You have to note that there's incremental change and transformational change, not one or the other, but they both exist. And when we do this massive change, the transformational part, we've got to be very careful how we take people through that, which is why I really like to talk about William Bridges' work around managing transitions. Because there's organizational change and then there's people transition. And sometimes those just do not travel together. So you've got this amazing organizational change plan. You've got how you want to roll it out. You've got everything assigned to all kinds of different people. And then you've got your workforce, the people that have got to move with that and actually participate in the change. And what you'll see on this particular slide is that people have to go through, and it's backwards thinking here. So you have to end, then move to the neutral zone, and then begin again before you can fully participate in whatever change process is occurring. So when we talk about ending first, that means that's where people have to say, okay, what I have known is going to be no longer. The way we used to do it is not going to be how we do it. And sometimes you'll get those different reactions like denial. When we changed the law in 2012, now this was a law change, not a policy change. So to change the law, you've got legislation, you've got executive branch government coming together, so a lot of effort, a lot of people, and that just doesn't happen quickly. We even had employees who were said, well, yeah, I'll wait and see. So this whole wait and see idea. However, the law changed, and we had to quickly understand, we had to help people see the laws changed, the way we do business has changed, so here's how we need you to get on board. But without realizing, we had people sitting in the background saying, yeah, I'm going to wait and see. I'm going to wait this one out as if it will go away. Knowing that helps you make an action plan where you can respond to that. You've also, I don't know if you've ever been invited to the meeting after the meeting. This is such a fun meeting to show up to. Sometimes, I never get invited to those meetings, but sometimes I will just show up to those meetings because I'll see them happening and I'll be like, hey, what's going on? How's everybody doing? And what I realized, though, is the meeting after the meeting is the place where all the resistors come together to help champion together this idea, how can we prove that this is not going to work? So let's say you're in a meeting, a big announcement says, so we've got a big announcement coming. We're going to be doing this change in our organization. We need everybody on board. Everybody in the meeting kind of nods their heads, and then there's that meeting after the meeting where people band together and say, so this won't work. We tried this 10 years ago. I mean, who do they think they are? And you begin to really realize, oh, my goodness, there are resistors to this process. And not just resistors, but active resistors, which means they're out recruiting more resistors. So you got to be able to spot those kind of things early on, because if people don't move past the ending phase and your change plan starts going, you leave people behind, and the change actually is not successful because we haven't paid attention to. First, we have to help people understand what has to end. When we do that, we move people into this neutral zone where they're trying to figure out, even sometimes jockeying for, how do I exist in this new world? How do I make sure that I have a role? I don't know what my role is. And so now all of what was comfortable and made people feel like, okay, this is what I do for this organization, this is how I contribute, now all of that is up in the air. So there's anxiety. And in the neutral zone, people start to say, okay, so what does this look like? This is when training is occurring because you want people to learn what the new way will be, the new way of doing things, the new way of service, the new way of making products, whatever that might be. You want to make sure that people in the neutral zone are getting equipped for the change that's going to occur so that they can be invited into the space of being a change agent. So when we talk about this pathway to becoming a change agent, it is deliberate, it's intentional, and it doesn't happen organically. You've got to actually, as a leader within an organization, help to take charge of the conversation, help to take charge of how people move. And one of the first things is to realize people aren't moving with you, or people aren't moving with the team that created the change. You got a lot of buy-in with who came up with this idea, oh, let's do this. This will improve this, and we can increase our efficiency this way. And if you weren't on that visioning team where high buy-in exists, then think about all the people who you've got to go get and help to create commitment and buy-in so that the change can actually occur. Here's what we do know. You can't decree successful change because people don't move like that. So there's this ending piece, and you as the leader recognizing that people have to go through giving up maybe what they don't want to give up, and maybe stop doing things they didn't want to stop doing. And that's where you have to insert training to make sure people feel comfortable. Okay, all right, I can do this. I can contribute here. I see how this could potentially work out. And the transition is slow. And so as people move, the new beginning actually is where there is some enthusiasm, the momentum in the organization. And that happens when more change agents are created. And as we go through it, it's important to know there are specific things, and this is what we did in the state to make sure, and these are the tools that I'm talking about, being very specific about what interventions inside the transition can you do to actually help people become those change agents that you're needing, and not just the few, but I'm talking about the many. So we had to, and here's some of the interventions that we did. When we knew we had a resistor, we brought those resistors into the planning meeting. Now, it's a tough pill to swallow because typically people don't want to be around negative people. And so now you're actually inviting the negative person to the table. But when you do that, here's what's incredible. That negative person starts hearing why this change is important. They start, you've invited them into the conversation where they're with other people who are starting to see how it might work. And now you're getting their voice. And now you're saying, so what are your concerns about this? And as they share their concerns, the group begins to nurture those concerns, embrace those concerns, and help them feel like their voice is being heard. And then through the change process, all of a sudden, because they were brought into the conversation, you see less and less resistance. It's amazing how that happens, but a lot of us don't want to take that step. I know personally it's hard to invite negativity into a space where you would just as soon ask them to stay in their own world and not surface in mine. The other one that I think is really important to note here is sometimes we announce change and we go right to the to-do list. And we leave out a very important intervention, and this is what I call the business case. This is selling the why and the value add part of the change. So that means we're not just announcing what it is. Simon Sinek wrote a great book, Start with Why. And I always think that is a really important business approach to anything that we do. And that why is telling the workforce, is telling the leaders, is making sure we all have one message on why this change is critical. And if we don't have a good business case, that is a sign that maybe this change is not as significant as we thought it was. So the business case is really, really important to making sure and selling. And it is a selling experience where you're asking people to listen to what it is and why we're doing it, and to trust the process, and also trust the leaders that we're going to get on the other side of this, and they are being invited into helping make that happen. And as we do that, I'm telling you, the one thing that we have found in any massive transformational change or even in incremental change, communication is the secret. I love playing that rumor game where you tell somebody one thing and then you ask them to tell it to the next person, and then that person tells it to the next person. It is just a great way to illustrate how so many messages get distorted as it moves from one person to the next. And what I want to make sure we talk about at the organizational level with leaders who lead change and are wanting to create change agents, we have to figure out messaging where it is communicate, and communicate some more. And there is a simple, aligned message where everyone's hearing the same thing. We do a lot of different things in this. We may invite our commissioners to do a video to the workforce. I know that my commissioner, who I work for, Commissioner Rebecca Hunter, who is visionary, who is transformational in and of herself, every day I get to work for somebody who wants the workforce of 40,000 people who are in 95 counties across the state to hear that they matter, that we want to help develop them, we want them to help reach their potential, and she will share those kind of messages with them through video. Or she might send an email to all employees to say, here's why we're doing this. Well, here's the invitations for you to be a part of this. Commissioner Hunter leads by collaboration. That's one of her strengths, and she really believes the more people that are talking about a decision that's about to happen, the better, because we're getting all different kinds of perspectives. And I think she models the way for what we're really trying to do across the state in any change situation. Is we've got to communicate. And it's not just one-way communication, it's two-way communication. It's inviting people into the dialogue early so they feel like they have a voice, even if what they want is not what ends up happening. However, it's amazing when people feel like they've been heard, that they will get on board eventually and figure out how they can add value. And when we look at this internal case for change, see, I believe we don't want to change just to change. And I also think it's important to ask really important questions up front, very early in the process. Somebody has an idea, and oh, that sounds amazing, and let's do this and this and this and this. And before we get too far down on that path, I really like to look at these three aspects of organizational learning inside change. So one, the belief, we have to make sure that there is belief that change is needed. That means we need data. We need to see what the problem is very clearly and how it's disrupting the business, or it's impacting our effectiveness in a negative way, or even our efficiency. And so the belief that change is needed is one piece of this business case. The second thing that has to happen is that the belief that the change is advantageous. So if we do this, then this is what could be. So I love those if-then statements, especially around when we're talking about, is this advantageous? It's going to cost us some money. It's going to cost us some training. We're going to have to really ask people to do something differently. And so is it really worth it? That's a really important question to ask. And then finally, I think we have to be realistic and the belief that change is possible. So is there this hopefulness that enough people out there can rally around this and bring this possibility into reality? See, I think you take all three of those, and then it's inside where they intersect that gives you the business case for change. That says what it is, why we're doing it. We have the data to support that, so it's not just a fly by the seat of my pants kind of decision, but it's thoughtful. And what employees like is to be led by leaders in change that are thoughtful, that show that this is how this has been laid out, this is how you've been considered. We haven't not thought about you or in this area. And the way you get to that place is through focus groups and having your people, even your resistors, at the table to help you think about what this is really all about. And if you want to become a change-ready organization, I think these are some things that really have to be in place. One, you got to make sure you have really mastered this art of hovering. So you think big picture, and you're not just thinking so granular that you're in your own world, kind of just that tunnel vision of here's what I do and not aware of what else is happening in the organization. And I love teaching executives about how to hover, and it's not micromanaging. Don't misunderstand me there. The art of hovering is looking at the organization as a whole to see where are those kinks in the pipes or those roadblocks on the interstate that needs an alternate route. We might have a bridge that needs repairing, and so we have a bottleneck. Where is it that we really need to pay attention? And that also helps you prioritize. Where do you need to start? What's most important? Where's the area that's really causing most of the concerns? As you look at that, I think this 360 communicating, remember I said it's not just one way. And so I call that the up, down, and all around communicating. So people are getting one message. People are feeling like they're a part of what's happening. I know when we roll out transformational change across this huge organization or enterprise of government, we do it in steps. So we say, hey, this is coming, save the date. it's a go-live date for a new performance management system. So if we're going to roll out a new system, there are things that we want to do to make sure people are prepared and they start hearing about it soon enough. So when we push that go-live button, it doesn't shock the system. But there's a sense of, oh, that's what's coming. Oh, yeah, I went to that training. I can do this. And you're remembering those stages of transition, and you're hoping that most people now are in this neutral state of saying, what is this? How can I be a value add? How can I contribute? And am I going to matter in this change? So you're really wanting during this to become this change-ready organization. These are the things you want to be essential in order to be successful there. I love this continuum because it says, I love it personally as a great self-assessment, great for your teams. You can use this tool. It's a great exercise. How are we going to become change agents? So, and you can change that question on this tool to say, am I averse to change? Am I resistant to change? Am I change managing? And I'll tell you what all those mean as you ask those questions. But I think as we look at that continuum, it's obvious where you want to be is change-friendly and change-seeking. But those are stay easy and do hard. And so let's look at change averse. So you're looking at this, and if you're change averse, this is when you're really trying to avoid change, right? So, you really would like to just sneak away and not be a part of it and kind of act like it doesn't exist. You have this idea when you're change averse that you got to keep things the way they are. Why fix something that's not broke? Why do we need to initiate change? Things are fine. Then you've got your change resistant. To this person, it prefers stability and permanence and really doesn't enjoy the messiness of change. So decisions to change, many times you might see a change resistant person just delay or stall those change decisions. Making, and as we talk about it, they're not adverse, but they really are just trying to resist having to go through any type of change. Now, change managing is where there is the recognition that ongoing change occurs, and that while there's still this need or desire for stability, a change managing person will accept change and will prepare for it. The motto for a change managing person is just do it. Just do it. Kind of rip the Band-Aid off and let's do it. I would prefer not to. I'd prefer the stability and the consistency or constantness of what I'm doing. But okay, I'll accept it and we'll prepare for it. I'll go to the training and get what I need to move forward. But then you've got those individuals who could rate themselves as change agents on this continuum being change friendly. This is deliberately wanting to implement processes to make change easier, to remove barriers for change. Actually, improvements are identified and removed. So this person who's change friendly feels empowered to find ways to improve work processes, feels empowered to say, yes, I have this mindset of continuous improvement. And I want to try to do that in my everyday work, is always thinking about how can we get more efficient and more effective. And then you've got your employees who might be, or you yourself might be, change seekers. And when you're change seeking, this is when you really value change at one of your very core values. So your commitment to change is very high, and you don't want to see change fail. You have this energy about you in the midst of change where continuous improvement and learning are really highly valued by you as you're a lifelong learner. And typically my change seekers want to be in organizations who are learning organizations and get really frustrated in organizations who don't change very often. And so as we look at this, it's wanting to make sure that we understand change seeking means you're comfortable leading change, you're comfortable being a part of that group, and our change champions really come out of the change-friendly and change-seeking groups. So I wanted to make sure that you saw our 8 markers of the change agent pathway, and we kind of put them on this pathway so that you could see where they all exist and how to navigate it. So if you start in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see there are 8 markers on this pathway that in order to be a really successful change agent, it has to be that you are clear. You have clarity and you can communicate the why of this change that's occurring. It's the why that are going to help people move through that transition of ending what they used to do and moving into that neutral zone, figuring out what they can do, and then beginning again with this new momentum and the possibility of what can be and this new sense of energy. You want to identify your change sponsors. Remember, I told you it all starts with leadership. Change sponsors, you got to get those at the top of the house. They got to validate the change. They got to talk about the change. They have to support the change. And sometimes they have to support it visually by being present. And also, and this is part of those, you want to make sure that your executives are not just aware of what's happening, but why it's happening and how they can help. A lot of times I'll invite executives to do A, B, or C as part of the change initiative to demonstrate to the workforce, this is important, it's a part of the executive's vision, and here's why we need to do it. If you're moving on down the pathway, you'll also see the markers be change-friendly, remove barriers to change. And so you want to look at yourself on that change continuum and realize, oh my goodness, I need to be more than just change managing. I need to be change-friendly and change-seeking. And and when you hit that place, mentally, you can begin to say, how can I get those barriers out of the way? If I see meetings after meetings occurring, then I can go to those meetings and say, hey, you all, let's give this a chance. Let's rally around. Let's stop being negative and think about all the possibilities, how we can help. You also want to create change champion opportunities. So that is a place for champions to actually stand up and speak to the workforce. If you find folks who are good at what's happening or have grasped really early on in the change process that they're good, they've got this, have them do something to communicate to everybody, here's what this is all about, here's why I'm excited about it, I invite you to come and try it and join us because we're really trying to move here. And not just having one person, but having multiple people who are spread out over the workforce in all different levels, being those champions for change, and also not tolerating the negativity that can sometimes permeate lower down in organizations. If you look in that middle marker, it talks about, being change-seeking. So that is, you really have you operate from this mindset of continuous improvement. So change, you're okay with change. Sometimes you invite change. You welcome feedback because you know that it's in continuous improvement that your customer satisfaction scores are going to go up. You're going to be able to match the demands of the customer in the future because your organization, your business, your team, your particular product or service is going to be able to move with the demands of the customer when you have that continuous improvement mindset. And then you'll see the marker that says communicate, communicate, communicate. I can't tell you how important that is. And remember, I call that 360 communication. It's not one way, but it's up, down, and all around. And then if you'll look at the people and processes, those deserve equal effort. So many times I see leaders paying attention to the processes and forgetting that we have to manage the transition of people as well. And that is helping people move from that ending stage into the neutral and then to beginning. And one of the ways we do that is celebrate small and big wins. So that is making sure people know that you're paying attention, and that by celebrating the big and small wins, then you're recognizing, okay, this is working. Or let's say it didn't work at first, but we figured out something, and now it does work, and this is a big part of what we're doing. Well, when we share that and we celebrate with folks, they really begin to feel like, okay, I'm part of something bigger than myself, and I really need to join and be on board and help move through. So these are my top tips for being this change agent and actually this pathway for success. I think this is a great tool to use in teaching employees. I think this presentation could be a toolkit for you to actually create a learning workshop for your employees, for your teams, for your executives to say, okay, how can we use these markers in our organization to make sure we're being deliberate and intentional about change, so that change doesn't come across as flippant or fly by the seat of our pants, but change is viewed as critical, that we realize that, yes, it needs to happen because we have a concern here. It's advantageous for this organization to do it because it will help us serve better our customers. And then finally, there's this hope that we can continue to be who we need to be for all of our customers and the demands that society is now placing on all our organizations, public and private sector, to succeed. Thank you so much for letting me share our story and letting you share our pathway of how we're navigating change inside state government. Holly, I'll hand it back to you.
All right, thanks so much, Doc Holliday. I've got one more time to say Doc Holliday, so of course I'm going to do it. So thank you so much for the presentation and for being here. What I will do is leave this resources for change agent pathway for success slide up. Looks like you've cited some work here, good stuff with Harvard Business Review and whatnot. And then I do want to leave this slide open so that folks who are with us today can copy down your email address and how to hook up with you on LinkedIn. So let's go ahead and see what kind of questions came in. And in fact, I'm looking at a comment right now from Anne, and maybe we'll use that to start off a conversation here. So she says that she agrees with you and that executive sponsorship is key to change, but she also says, how do you feel about involving the squeaky wheel constituents in the change process?
So that's a great question. And I believe that the more we can get everybody to the table in some type of fashion where people, even if you can't physically pull people together, there's surveys, there's questionnaires, there's interviews where people feel like they have a voice. That's what we really try to pay attention to. And we call them listening tours because we like to go out and hear concerns. We want people to feel like it's not our way or the highway. We really want, and when we were changing in state government, when we were changing from a civil service organization or enterprise to a performance-based culture, we went on a listening tour. We asked questions like, what are your pain points? We asked supervisors to tell us, what are your struggles? That's when they're telling us. In civil service, we can't recruit. We can't retain our top talent. Everybody's getting across-the-board raises. And so top talent's getting paid the same as our poor-performing talent, and there's no incentives, and we're not recognizing or rewarding. But that was tough feedback for us. We had to really, though, put ourselves in a place where we listened to people and we welcomed those resistors.
All right, great. Thanks for that explanation, and I hope that satisfied Anne. And if you have any comments or anything for that, feel free and throw those into that question and answer box. So Sherry says she loved the presentation and wants us to show the prior slide with the references. So Sherry, I've pulled that back up for you. And how about we just leave this up for the rest of the question and answer session? I hope everyone gets what they need from that. And so Trish, for our next question, Robin asks if you have a template that you use to utilize these best practices are followed on a system or other type of projects.
So I do have several tools, and Robin, why don't you just email me and we'll see how we can hook you up on some of our. I do believe that why reinvent the wheel? Let's share our stuff. All boats rise when we work together and we can share our tools.
Great stuff there. All right, so let's go ahead and move to a question from Tad. Trish, what do you consider to be the most challenging component of the change agency pathway?
That's a great question. Gosh, and the most challenging. So I would have to say, if we don't get executive sponsors, then the most challenging I have seen is when we try to push change without an executive sponsor. And sometimes it's like, well, who's going to go? How are we going to get the executive sponsor? What are the questions that we need to ask to really get their buy-in? And so to me, that's the one that if it's missed, that's where we run into frustrations very early because people don't see the why as clearly. So getting that executive sponsor, one, I think it's sometimes more difficult because we may not all have access to those executives. So we have to think strategically together, how do we get that buy-in through our upline? And how do we bring them into this conversation? So I would certainly say that is really critical. And then I don't find many change seekers. I really don't. And I see more change managing and below on that continuum. I see very few change friendly and change seeking. And I think that as leaders, we have to train our people. What does that look like? What behaviors are there? So that's really, I get most frustrated myself because I don't find friendly or seekers in the process very quickly.
All right, thanks for that answer. Trish, we'll move to a question now. I'm kind of piggybacking on that comes from Chris, and I think this will really satisfy a lot of minds out there. What is an example of how you've handled someone who's resisted change initiative from the beginning?
So what's important for us to consider is the lens they're looking through. And I'm a big advocate of perspective because I believe decision quality, the quality of decisions comes from ensuring that I have as many perspectives as possible. And so I really think those resistors have to be brought into the task force, have to be given a place to voice their concerns. And when that happens, there is something emotionally that transpires where people feel now connected to what's going on. And it's in that connection that you really can change a resistor to someone who will actually help you move other resistors to a place of acceptance.
All right, great point there. So we've got time for one more question, and this one comes from Kristen. Trish, do you have any tips about helping to ensure leadership, executive sponsorship beyond mere lip service? Yes.
So here's a tip. When you have an executive sponsor, you have to circle back with them. I try to do it about every 2 weeks to say, here's what's happening. So I give frequent updates, and then also I give them credit. Because executives want to know that if they're putting their own effort, if they're putting their time into something, that it is mattering, it matters to the whole process. I give them credit to the workforce, and I give them credit, and I show how through their sponsorship we've been able to do this, this, and this. And I'm a big data person because I believe data tells a story. And if we've got the quantitative and the qualitative data, the executives see how they actually have contributed to something that means something to the organization. And so I really believe that that is one of the secret sauces of making that successful.
All right, cool. And we'll let that secret sauce wrap up our content for today. So I'll go ahead and flip back to Trisha's slide for just a second. One more time, her email address is trish.holiday@tn.gov. And just a reminder to everyone we have with us today, today's webcast has been approved for HR, CI, and SHRM credit. And you can view those credits for attending today's webcast by visiting your My HCI profile, check out that drop-down menu, and then go to My Learning Journey at the bottom. One more big thank you to Trish, Cornerstone OnDemand, and for all of us here at HCI, thanks for being here. We'll see you next time.